Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to Talking Comics. My name is Dale Jacobs. I'm one of the co-curators of Between the Panels, along with Suzanne Matheson. And we have 3 of the 4 artists here, I think. David Collier will be here at any minute, and we'll just slide him in and continue the conversation. That's basically what we're going to do, is just have a conversation for the next hour or so. We have some questions to ask, and we'll just see where the conversation takes us. So first of all, I'll just introduce you quickly to the artists. This is Kagan McLeod, and Jeff Lemire, and David Finch. So, welcome. That's the first question.
Sure. First of all, can you hear us all right at this volume? If we put the evil mic aside, then we'll be okay?
Yes.
So, all right. So our first question is, how did you first get started creating comics? And I don't know what order you want to answer this in.
David Finch has to answer every question first.
Good.
Yeah, settle.
Answers will all be more elaborate because of the debate.
That's right. Oh, you're supposed to be thinking about it. Yeah, how far back do you want to go?
For me, I knew that I liked drawing when I was very young, but it's not something that was really encouraged for me. Coming up in Windsor, I'm sure you can relate, it's not really something that you see, I saw as an option. So I didn't really pursue it, and I also thought of drawing really as sitting down in front of, a model, whatever that is, flowers or whatever, and just drawing that, which never interested me at all. As a matter of fact, it was a real off-putting thing for me. So I remember I took art in high school 3 times. I failed it twice, and I just couldn't sit there and do the work that they were asking us to do. And I think it was, the curriculum was good. It just wasn't appropriate for what I wanted, and unfortunately I didn't know what I wanted. So I was 20 years old by the time my sister used to read comics, and I never gave them a chance. It wasn't really my interest at the time, and I didn't really look at them. And I was finally 20 years old. I found John Byrne's X-Men, the Phoenix Saga. This is an older comic now, and that got me into Mark Silvestri. She had some old back issues of Mark Silvestri's X-Men, and he had just finished Wolverine. He was doing, this is the early days of Image Comics, which I don't know if any of you are familiar, but Image Comics is all about big panels and things hanging out of the panels, and a lot of rendering, and really that's kind of what I do. That's what I love, and it was that work that really actually made me think, wow, I want to do this. I love just the visual excitement, and I think my influences have maybe been a little darker over my career, but it's really the core of what I like. So that's kind of what got me interested.
It's the same. My answer is the exact same. For me, yeah, I think it's similar. I grew up not in Windsor, but outside of Windsor on a small farm, and there certainly weren't things like this where comics were sort of, in mainstream culture and like they are today. And it was just something I just always read comics since I was really young, but for whatever reason, I was just always instantly attracted to them as soon as I was old enough to realize what they were, and just constantly copying the pictures. And but again, it never seemed like something I could do as a career, for sure. I took art in high school and knew I wanted to pursue something, creative, something with art, but not really knowing what that was. Then I went to film school after high school in Toronto, and got a lot more invested in storytelling in different ways, screenwriting, filmmaking, and then I kind of fell in love with comics again as a storytelling medium through that, realized the potential of it, and just never looked back. So.
For me, getting into comics professionally was kind of, well, it wasn't professional at the beginning. I graduated from an illustration program at Sheridan College, and got a job right after school in the graphics department at the National Post, which was kind of like a little bit art related, but mostly like maps and financial stuff and things like that, so I needed like something, an outlet to do on the side. So I started working on the Kung Fu comic book as a self-promotion kind of thing, or self-published thing, not self-promotion. And did the consignment thing where you take it around to comic shops and see if they'll take it, and you kind of casually go back and see if any's sold. And
I was doing the same thing at the exact same time as Kagan, and I would see all of them in a Kung Fu, so I was checking all my accounts.
So, I mean, it took a while but it was a perfect business card too. Like you can have your self-published work and show that you can make something. So that's kind of snowballed from there for me.
You touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if all of you could talk a little bit about your influences and some of the artists that you look to.
Personally, right now, I love looking like I guess you'd call it golden age illustration, like the Andrew Loomis stuff in the other room there. Was really inspiring to me. That kind of period of work. Bob Peake and Robert Fawcett and Leindecker's in there too. That kind of stuff really speaks to me now.
Yeah, I think it changes at different points in
Yeah.
life. You know, when I was a kid, the only comics I really saw were whatever you could find at a newsstand. So it'd just be Marvel and DC stuff from the 80s when I was a kid, John Byrne and George Perez. And then in my teenage years, I kind of got more into films. So filmmakers like David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick and just certain cinematographers sort of started to influence me.
So in terms of shot composition and things like that?
Yeah, and visually telling a story,
Yeah.
communicating things visually, and then and that kind of continued at university, obviously, because I went to film school, so I got pretty invested in that.
Yeah.
And then I kind of fell in love with comics again, like I was saying, but it was more like in Toronto, there are bigger comic shops and stuff, so I was exposed to more things that I hadn't seen as a kid, like stuff from Europe and independent and alternative comics, and kind of seeing a much wider variety of drawing styles and storytelling styles. So it's always different, and even today, every month or so I find a new artist that I love.
Right.
I try to stay inspired by stuff outside of comics, so that you kind of, it's when you see comics that are really good, you kind of get down on yourself or think of what you could be doing, what you should be doing. And, so I'd like to try and, not always look too often.
Yeah, I thought the Alex Ross room, where some of the influences that you mentioned were really interesting. That he was influenced by someone like Norman Rockwell is really fascinating to then see it coming through in his work. Dave?
Yeah, for sure. I have to say what you said about looking at comics. There are times I get, every month I get the big box of everything that DC Comics does, and some of that stuff is just, and especially the hardest for me is when it's an artist that I've never even heard of, and I open it and it's incredible, and where did this guy come from? And there's just so much talent. I feel like right now there's more talent in the business than there ever has been, because it's really become a global thing. It used to be, years ago, back in the 50s, it was just people that lived really in the New York area. You needed to be right there.
Yeah, and you get like people in Brazil and
Brazil, oh yeah.
Philippines.
Yeah, China now. That's market, and I mean, how many people are there? So yeah, it's getting much, much more competitive. My earliest influences, like I said, are all the Image Comics guys, and I haven't really veered too far from that, truthfully. I love Simon Bisley, he's an English artist. He's really, he does big, huge muscles with veins and that kind of thing. I love that stuff. And I like drawing veins, even on characters. They'll have like they have a costume on, and you can see the veins right there. So, my favorite artist right now is Eduardo Rizzo, who is a bit of a departure for me, because he's really not that type of artist at all, but he is he's a genius at composition with shadow and black, and he's got like a really noir style. It's very Frank Miller influence, but in my opinion, I feel like he takes it much further. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. And it's always I love European comics, and I love everything, and I've got a huge collection, and I try to find ways to incorporate that stuff, but still try to stay true to, the style that I have. And I find actually for me it's something that can be a little stifling is I have a certain amount of success with the work that I'm doing, and I'm always afraid whenever I bring anything new. And I know I shouldn't feel that way, but I really am afraid of trying something that's going to maybe break what I'm doing. So I think, you know, sometimes that keeps my work back from where it could be.
Yeah, I feel like at the beginning of your career, you get an assignment and you're really worried that you're not going to be able to do it well enough. And then after a while you get over that, you just know that you can just do what you do. And then you get to the stage where we might be at now, where you're afraid to go too far.
Yeah, because you know what they expect from you. And you really get into something new, but you can't necessarily,
Yeah.
I'm doing Wonder Woman right now, which really, that's not a heavy shadow book, and all I care about right now is shadow. So I'm doing a very dark Wonder Woman.
Sorry, everybody. As you can see, me being part of this show is like a total fraud because it's possible for me to get totally lost in Windsor. So I'm not really from Windsor as much as I should be. Coming from Amherstburg to Windsor, like, just totally got lost. I really apologize to everybody.
So this is David Collier, everyone. So we're just talking about influences, artistic influences.
Well,
Talk a little bit about that.
I am from Windsor a little bit because you've heard like of artists and stuff who grew up with, you know, no books in the house or like no exposure to art. But my parents are like the Walter Gretzky of artists' parents. You know, my mother worked at the Windsor Library, and my dad's a painter, and I got enormous exposure to art and letters from them. We had like this great Gustave Doré book when I was growing up, and Dante's Inferno, and just like, you know, Winslow Homer's breezing up painting over my bed, and it's just, yeah, they just totally encouraged me. Yeah.
Have there been some artists over the course of your career who have influenced you at different points?
Yeah. Karl Barks was a big one when I was a kid, the Doll and Doc,
Yeah.
you know. We lived near a variety store in the early 70s that we got all this stuff. And this issue of the Atlantic, this month's issue, has an interesting article, and it's called Why It Pays to Be a Jerk, right? And it's like, what's the difference between being a jerk and being somebody who is, how do you put it, like, not exactly a real, no, kind of a, here, I have it written down on my stick, talking about visiting my family, and I was thinking, what do you call this kind of person who is, you know, Steve Jobs was one of them, and Patton, like, sometimes society needs these people who are very rude, and but they are supportive at the same time, right? So this article in Atlantic hit exactly what I was thinking about with my relationship to Robert Crumb, who always, when I was like a teenager, I'd send him my stuff and he'd go, you know, Collier, I'm thinking about publishing this stuff, but I don't know, it's a little too obtuse, you know, like in comics we have to be entertaining and stuff. So what they're talking about in this month's issue of the Atlantic magazine is disagreeable givers, right? And people who are, you know, kind of they tell it like it is, and Crumb was always like that to me, right? And he's always very critical, and he still is. He's like, don't, this cute and clever stuff you try to do is,
I wondered if you would mind talking about the experience of seeing your work in the exhibition, in the gallery here. You're all looking at each other.
Well, I would say it's incredibly gratifying to have my work in Windsor at the Art Gallery. It's a little surreal, you know. Certainly not something I ever would have expected to happen. So I'm very, very grateful. It's an honor to have it up. And, you know, the real truth is that I walked all through the Alex Ross section, and it makes it very difficult to walk into my section and take a look what I got. It's tough. I mean, I've never actually seen his work physically up close, and it's pretty breathtaking. I think it's, I mean, it's remarkable in print, but it's incredible in real life, and it's very daunting to see.
Yeah, it's very surreal. I mean, exhibiting in a fine art gallery was never something that I aspired to do. I just wanted to tell stories and make comics. It's gratifying to know that if you do what you do and kind of believe in yourself, that you can open those kind of doors. And the work, and like I said, when I was a kid, there would never be an exhibit like this of comics. Comics was not part of mainstream culture at all, but it's changed so much since I was young.
Well, I don't think they were selling much more.
We could only have both of those. Yeah. So yeah, it's cool, and it's also very interesting seeing the contrast of all the four of us and what we do is so different from one another, and just seeing the diversity and the different kinds of comics that are out there is really neat to see it all together.
Yeah, I definitely kind of daunting, like where you look at the presentation and the space and everything like that, and you start to kind of think, oh, I don't know if my stuff's quite good enough for this. And then there's some stuff that but I think an artist is always really critical of his own work, and I think that's good anyways. You think it would be a bad sign if you were really happy with everything you've done and didn't need to improve.
Well, it's kind of actually nerve-wracking because you're at the mercy of the people putting up the show. And this gallery did a really nice job, and the framing's really nice, But you never know. Like, my family and me have been living on wine and cheese for the last few months because there's this Colville comic, right? And it was at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and so it was pretty nice. And, and then we moved to the National Gallery of Canada, and we just went there, my wife and I. And so this comic I did, like a comic book you read at home, and it's like there's a context and stuff. But what they did at the National Gallery is there's this one panel where there's an art critic, like, dissing Colville, right? And what they did, they blew it up. That one panel the size of this wall, right? So if you're in Ottawa this summer, you can check it out. It's like this art critic saying, like, Colville, who's going to care about... So now, it's taken something of my work out of context, and just people like, they're hissing at my work, right? And it's just like, well, no, if you read the whole comic book, you'll understand this one panel, right? But they... like I was there when they took Lorraine Harper, Stephen Harper's wife through there. They just like took her, they didn't even let her look at my section, right? It's too upsetting, right? So you guys got to watch out, because a designer of a show can take your work out of context and it's like really surprising.
This is such a cool idea, and that's what Jeff was saying about how oh yeah, I'd love to do that.
I admire your work. So, I've never met you before. Worked in the same office at the National Post.
Oh, really?
I guess not at the same time, but yeah.
What I was saying is that now you see people using comics in places that you wouldn't have years ago, like this for promotion of an art exhibit, or I get hired to do comics for magazines as, like, instead of an article, they'll do a comic treatment for, that's some of the pieces in the show here are that type of work, where they just want to do a graphic novel treatment, they call it, because it's kind of a buzzword. So it's a lot different than, there's still room to grow, I think, in terms of readership, but it's more on people's mind now than it has been.
I wanted to ask you about your approaches for different kinds of projects, if that changes and if the tools you use change. I know some of the pieces we have in the show, you're using different media, etc. I wonder if you could talk about that and what determines your approach for each project.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the book is, but
Yep.
for me, I kind of almost have two careers where I do my graphic novels, my comics, and then I'm also writing for like Marvel or DC, so obviously my approach to both of those things is really different. You try to keep it true to yourself and put as much of yourself into each of those as you can.
I got a side question. All of us work traditionally, and a lot of artists are going full digital. What do you guys?
Well, and that's one thing when we went to, I've been to Dave's studio, Dave Finch's studio a couple times, and the digital board is there but you don't use it anymore, do you?
I spent a year using it, and I think it's a great tool. I mean, it does incredible things. Erasing's a whole lot easier, you know. But I just can't get the same quality of line. That's really what it comes down to. If I could, if it looked exactly like what I would do on paper, then I would have no good excuse to not do it. I would work on the computer. But I work with an inker, so I pencil, and then I have a great inker who uses a brush for everything, and his line is beautiful. You could give me the brush, I couldn't replicate it. So I think I'm probably the only one here that I don't do the work that you actually see printed with you guys. You do the whole process, whereas I just do the pencils, so I really rely on somebody else. And I just found doing the work on the computer, I was doing all of it myself, and my finish line just isn't as nice. So
for me, drawing was always an escape, you know, and I think we spend enough time, you know, looking at screens, like our whole culture. The last thing I want to do when I sit down to work is look at another screen. I really love just being by myself at my desk with actual brushes and getting dirty and messing things up.
And I've noticed and several of you sometimes use watercolor, sometimes it's pencil and ink. How do you decide, depending on the story you're telling?
It's more of an evolution for me of my style. I mean, I started off just doing black and white art, and then I had a colorist that worked with me in a few projects who would work digitally, and he was really great.
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah.
I have a mic too.
Can we close the door? It's very hard for us in the back to hear you.
There's room in the front if you guys want to take up some seats up here.
Or we can just talk loud and use our hand. Well, I'll tell you something about digital. Okay. You ever see that movie, Man?
It's all right. We have all these seats waiting for you.
Van Keaton's giving like Woody Allen some leads, like, come on, try it, come on. And Woody Allen's like, no, it just makes me too wonderful. You know? And that's probably the way digital is for a lot of people. It's like, it just makes you too wonderful. Like Google makes you too smart. It makes you smarter than you really are. And if you can, use like these digital effects, like radiated tone, it's like all of a sudden, I can do all this. But if you actually paint with a brush, it shows your flaws. And I think a lot of the charm of comics is you see how flawed the artist is. Like when Archie comics, they sell more comics in Canada than anywhere else. So you look at the supermarket checkout, you see an Archie comic on the rack, and it'll be like, here's the gang visiting Canada, and it'd be like the CN Tower with the Rocky Mountains in the background. And you look at that and you think, oh yeah, the artist who did that, he doesn't know much, and it's just like, comics are, the charm of comics, the gaucheness of comics is the flaws of the artist, and anything digital is just trying to make it perfect.
Right. And if something like this, like I have smudges on a lot of my stuff, and for my own work I don't like it, but for seeing other people's work I like to see a little thumbprint and where they whited out something, and it's
coffee stain in the corner.
yeah, more real.
Jeff, did you have a couple more things you wanted to say?
I was just talking about, you were asking about watercolor and stuff, and I was just saying for me it was more of an evolution where I started black and white, and then when I started working at Vertigo DC, they wanted everything colored, but I wasn't really comfortable with that, so they used the digital colorist on me, which he was good, but it never really fit with my style, so now I'm just kind of forced myself to learn how to watercolor and stuff. So
a lot of my stuff in the show is, I would call it half finished, because it's inking with some light washes on top to kind of give it that hand done feel, but and then I would take it in and do the coloring in Photoshop, because I'm just not confident enough that I can do it all. Because I like the freedom to change my mind and add a click rather than.
Yeah, I'll bump up my yellows in Photoshop, right? But,
Yeah. That kind of stuff.
Somebody said, computers are good for editing, but it's not a creative medium, right?
Yeah.
It's probably good.
I disagree only in that I think the more advanced they get, you can certainly cheat with it, and I mean it's gotten to the point now where you can find 3D models and put them all together and kind of make a pseudo comic that way. But I think the more advanced they get, the more close it's going to get to just being natural. And eventually, I got to figure that working on a screen, they'll get to the point where they can replicate paper. I mean, I'm sure they have teams of people trying to do it.
There's some, watercolor photo app filters and things like that where you can take a photo and turn it into a watercolor painting. And it's a little terrifying how much it looks like a real watercolor. And it's like, yeah.
Going back to the flaws, like if you go back to like the beginnings of comics, there's this cartoonist Tad who drew for like the New York Herald or something in 1910, and then one time he had to draw a skeleton and he put like 2 bones in the upper arm, right? It's like, that's the charm of comics. It's
I've been known to draw two left hands on a person.
Yeah. You look at Jack Davis's hands, they're just these huge claws, right?
It's your mistakes or your flaws that that's what your style is. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want perfection, you just take a photograph, you don't want to draw.
Yeah, it sucks the life out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have algorithms for that, though.
Smudge.
Do you have any advice for artists who are interested in starting in comics?
Well, it's certainly a lot easier now, I think, than it was when we were young. I know there's a number of really well-respected schools in the States offering programs and just comics and comic book storytelling, and so there's definitely channels for it that we didn't have, and even the use of social media to distribute your work is something we didn't have. So yeah, it's a lot easier, but I mean, at the end of the day, it just comes down to all that stuff's great, but if you just got to do the work, and comics is something that takes a long time to do. Just one page of comics takes a long, long time, and if you're not passionate about it, to be able to sit down and do that every day.
It is disheartening to see something that took a month or longer to draw, and then to watch somebody read it in 4 or 5 minutes.
Seconds.
Maybe that's our role, because look how many people are on the planet now. It's like there's so much stuff out there, and stuff done by a cartoonist is just like, experience distilled, right? Like I'm reading this novelist, Norwegian novelist Karl Ove Knausgård, and it's like writing every bit of his life, and there's so much of it, right? But if a cartoonist tries to do that, and I kind of try to do that, you're not going to get, my struggle in 6 volumes. You're going to get like a little comic. Right?
So I don't know if it's there's more online web comics and things like that you can do now to get out there, but it's also something that there's so much of it that how do you get noticed? I don't know if I have an answer for that.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to get your work out there, but it's also, as a result of that, become much more competitive. But there is always a need for good artists. Publishers are always looking for them. And if your work is good enough, you can certainly make it. I would say what you said about drawing every day, drawing all day. I knew that it was right for me the minute I started. I started really late, but I was drawing 12 hours a day at least every day. I was avoiding my friends. It's all I wanted to do. And it's still kind of like that a little bit. I look forward to Mondays on the weekend. I love my kids, but I want to get back to working. So, and I think to be successful in a field like this, you need to love it. And if you love to draw, then you have absolutely the number one most important skill that goes into it, because it's like anything else. You can learn how to do it. It's like math. I mean, there are great books, and there's so much information online. You mentioned Andrew Loomis earlier on. He's phenomenal. You can actually find Andrew Loomis's work all online in PDF format, and he's an art education unto himself. So, I mean, the resources are out there. It really comes down to just having the will to put the work in, because it's thousands of hours of work to get to the point where you're good enough to put your work out there.
And a lot of people do, single pictures, and they do beautiful still images, but I think it's the comics that have a story attached to them that's the draw for a lot of people. You can really appreciate a great picture, but once you do the work that attach it to a story, that's where you kind of hook people in. So just doing the work is something that you'd have above many other talented artists. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I figured it was.
Okay, great, thanks. So let's talk about comics storytelling a little bit. Who have your influences been in terms of visual storytelling? You talked a bit about it, and do you have experiences with collaborative storytelling with working with, either as a writer with an artist or vice versa as an artist with a writer. If we could talk a little bit about storytelling in comics form, what that's like, and maybe if it's changed for you over the course of your careers.
I worked with Harvey Pekar once, and it's just the worst. You know? He was so, like, he's dead now, so you can. We went down to Cleveland and we took pictures of in the hospital he was working at and stuff, and it was just it was so hard. So that's about it for me. Collaborating.
That's about it for collaboration.
A lot of good things happened after that. I got accepted into the Canadian Armed Forces Artist Program because of it. I did this book with them. That was my support material. And then I ended up joining the Army again. So. Started on Monday, 6 weeks in the clothing warehouse in London. Yeah. Pays the bills sometimes.
I don't know about for comics, but I mean, if I've had experiences working with writers for articles and things like that, illustrating a story for a magazine or newspaper, it's always good to have somebody in between me and the author, because the author wants to save me work by telling me how to do it, and also like to include everything that's in every paragraph in the picture, where kind of get the overall idea, and break it down ourselves.
What about in the comic you're doing now with Chip Zdarsky? How
See,
much
so I
interplay is
think
there?
that helps because he's an artist, so he kind of knows what he knows where to trust me, and knows what's involved and how to break a beat down. So yeah, that's especially having a good relationship with him. It's much better that way.
Right, and you think him being an artist helps a lot?
Yeah.
Good. Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I've done pretty much, I do stuff myself that I write and draw, and I write for a lot of artists, and I'm drawing for a writer right now, so I mean, I kind of do all that stuff, and I enjoy it all. You know, it's all different parts of the process, but nothing compares to doing it all yourself. I think that's really what cartooning is, you know. But I do love working with other artists, and I think being an artist myself helps.
Are you precious when you?
No, I think it really helps me let go. I can just really, I work with artists that I trust, and I'm pretty hands-off because I understand the process. I think a bit more than maybe some writers do that never drawn.
Right, so you're not
And I think my scripts are pretty simple and pretty clear because I can break down beats visually really, like it's natural to me. It's not.
Right, and you give them leeway to.
Oh yeah, always, yeah. You want them to do it the best work they can do, and the more restrictions you put on, the worse the stuff's going to turn out. So it comes down to working with people who actually like their work, you know.
Right.
So you have to be very selective.
Dave?
I started out, my first job was actually an internship for an older artist, and so I learned everything that I know from that, including storytelling. I have to be honest, it wasn't really an emphasis, you know. I started Image Comics again. It was much more just about the big imagery, and so I learned some valuable, you know, ways to not completely screw up storytelling, but I didn't really learn much subtlety. And I think it wasn't actually really until I went to Marvel Comics, and I worked with Brian Bendis, who is a great writer over there, and he's also an artist. I learned a ton about storytelling, and he actually laid out pages a lot of times if he had something really specific or if he thought I couldn't do it. But I learned so much. I think by the end of working with him, I was a different artist. And I find I prefer to be able to work with just a plot and be able to do the storytelling myself, and I'm working that way right now. But when I'm working with a writer that's also an artist, it's a pleasure. It just goes easily, and I don't really have to think, and I know it's going to be, you know, it's going to be pretty solid.
Maybe just to change up the order a little bit, but what are you reading now, or what have you read recently? Does any work in comics stand out for you particularly from the past few years?
Yeah, you know, comics are great is that, you know, you can learn about history, you can learn about like different times. Like when I was a kid, I'd always be going in the library through the old newspapers and, see how far back you can see Popeye and stuff, right? And it's just such a quick way of learning about different cultures. And you heard about this guy, Shigeru Mizuki, this Japanese guy? This book is making me sweat, it's like Onwards Towards a Noble Death, and then it's his experience as a Japanese soldier in World War II, right? And you can see the officers saying, here come the Americans, we have to make a suicide charge, and then this other officer's like, no, we have to, do guerrilla action in the jungle and stuff. And you can see that these soldiers' lives are in the balance, are they going to do a suicide charge or do guerrilla warfare? And it just blew my mind and showed me like what a Japanese soldier's life was like during World War II.
Yeah.
Right,
And this particular artist is so interesting because there's some material that's just detailed, realistic, combined with this very cartoony images of
pass it
himself.
around if
So,
you
yeah,
want.
that's great.
Pretty interesting book. You got to read those Japanese comics from back to front, right to left.
Kagan, you're reading.
I'm kind of excited about Hip Hop Family Tree, which is by an artist named Ed Piskor, and it's basically starting in the 70s and talking about rap music and hip hop and everything like that. But it's done it's a sprawling, like very telling, a whole culture. It's very ambitious, and it's done kind of like I don't know, a little bit journalism to it, and he's not hiding the ugly bits, and he's a super nice guy, but you can tell he's got a little attitude with some of the the tone of some of the presentations, so it's really fun, and it's just going to be monthly now, so that's pretty cool.
It's a good format too. It's like one of those Mongol oversized